Welcome back. How can we make our Launch API a little bit more resilient? How can we make it handle missing or incorrect data without breaking our entire mission control application? When the cost of errors is so high, we need to take some extra time to consider what can go wrong and how to react when something inevitably does go wrong. And once we consider some of these error cases, we'll then connect our new endpoint with our React front end. Let's dive in. The first step is to validate our inputs. For example, we decided that the 4 required pieces of data that we require from our front-end clients is the mission, the rocket, destination, and the launch date. Now, there are entire libraries dedicated to validation, parsing dates, and error handling in Node. It would be impossible to cover all the combinations of packages and APIs that you might see in various different Node projects. What I'm going to show you will be the foundation. Instead, what I'm going to show you will be the foundation that you can use to understand what sorts of situations you might encounter with any API. How will our HTTP add new launch function respond when one of our required pieces of data is missing? First, we need to catch the fact that there is missing data in the first place. One way we can do this is by checking our request body, which has been assigned to this launch variable, for those properties. Now, there's a handful of different ways you can do this, but you'll often see something like if launch.mission, for example, is null or undefined, that is, it's this falsy value, and when you put the not exclamation mark here in front of it, this if statement will evaluate to true if the mission is missing. And we can do the same for the rest of our required fields. So if the launch mission is missing or the launch rocket name is missing or the launch date is missing, and I'll move this to a new line so we can see all of the different conditions, which include our last one, which is the launch destination. We'll say or not launch destination. So if any of these properties are missing on our body, well, we don't want to add our new launch. And we don't want to respond with a 201 created status code. Instead, we're going to return from our controller function, and we're going to set the response status code to 400. Remember, the 400 series status codes represent client errors, and the 400 error specifically is a generic bad request, where the server is saying that it doesn't understand your request because something about its structure or contents is invalid. We use the 400 status code when none of the other common 400 series status codes are appropriate. Most validation that's not security related falls under 400. And we use 404 not found if our request involves some kind of search. Maybe we're getting a item by its ID and the item at that ID doesn't exist. So when our data is missing and we know it's required, we're going to respond with 400 and a JSON response that tells the user a little bit more about what went wrong. We're going to set this error property to some message like missing required launch property. Now we could respond with just a string, but we've already decided that our API makes use of JavaScript object notation. We're going to be consistent in all of our responses so that our clients can parse our responses in a consistent way without having to check whether the response is just a string or a JavaScript object. Now, what about that date? Can we check to see that the launch date is at least a valid date and not just a greeting to whoever is reading our server's logs? In fact, there's many different approaches that we can take here. Once we pass our launch date property into the date constructor, we can use the launch.launchDate.toString function, which will return this invalid date string if what was passed in can't be converted to a valid date. So we can check if launchDate.toString equals invalid date, then again, we'd like to return from our controller, setting the status code to 400. And this time, in our error message, we'll say invalid launch date. Another shorter way of checking whether our date is valid or not is rather than calling the toString function, we instead call isNotAnumber, which is our built-in function to check if a value that we pass in is a number or not. And if we pass in a date object, like we do here, that date will first be converted into a number. So really quickly, in our node REPL, what's happening is, say we have some date that we're assigning to this date object. Maybe it's January 1st, 2030. When we call isNotAnumber on date, if it's a valid date, we'll get false. What on earth is JavaScript doing? Our function here, if it's passed an object, first calls the .valueOf function, even if you don't call it yourself. This is to convert the date to a number. So date.valueOf will return a number corresponding to the timestamp, the Unix timestamp for the date matching that object, but only if that date is valid. Whereas if we create a new date, not date, and we try to construct hello, not date.valueOf gives us not a number. There you go. And so, isNotAnumber will return true if the launch date was not successfully parsed as a valid date. Just a little side lesson on the isNotAnumber function in JavaScript. And when you're typing this function, just make sure that both ends here are capitalized. Or you can use the .toString method that we just saw. Both work equally well. It's time. Let's check if we're catching our errors and preventing some costly mistakes. I'll first save the controller file. And let's run npm run deploy. Now, if we go to Postman and we try to create a new launch with hello as our launch date, hopefully our API will catch our mistake. There you go. Our error object is being returned and our 400 bad request status code has been set. Whereas if we pass in a valid date, like January 1st, 2030, our request succeeds with a 201. And in fact, we can pass in any value here that can be successfully converted into a date by JavaScript's date class. Even a Unix timestamp, which is a number like 16914880000000. So what will our API return? Let's see. A new launch was created, and the date has been set to August 8th, 2023, which is the corresponding date for this Unix timestamp. All right, but what if we're missing the date entirely, or any of our required properties? Let's try removing it entirely. And if we send our request, our first error handler runs before we try to parse the date, and we get this missing required launch property error. Very nice. I think we're ready to connect our new Launches API with our front-end application. Let's keep this one going in the next video. I'll see you soon.